Cheers, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I am Dave Brown, and this is the New Populist. If you are new to my channel, please like and subscribe. Well, today we had the president of China, Xi Jinping, land in Russia to meet with his counterpart, Vladimir Putin, and reaffirm the friendship of these two countries, much to the chagrin of Western leaders who would like to see China and Russia split apart. Now, ironically, it is the actions of the West that have driven Russia and China closer together. Now, during their meeting, one thing that was brought up was the idea, this concept of a rules-based international order. Now, if you're in intellectual circles, you know what this is, but I don't think your average person has a good enough understanding of what exactly this is and why it's so important. And one of the reasons it's so important is because Russia and China and the United States have a very different idea of what this rules-based international order or system should be. And this disagreement is underlying the conflict today in Ukraine and the one that might arise in Taiwan in the future. So today I wanted to go over what this is. What is the rules-based international system as the U.S. describes it? What does Russia and China want? And what are the problems with these systems? And what is the real solution here to bring both sides together? So let's discuss this. And what is a rules-based international system? Well, let's get the definition or the concept as described by the Atlantic Council, because the Atlantic Council is a globalist organization, a neocon organization who love the rules-based international system. And so let's get their description of what it is. And they say the post-World War II rules-based international system led by like-minded allies and partners has produced unprecedented levels of peace, prosperity, and freedom, but it is coming under increasing strain. A foremost challenge to the system is the return of great power competition with revisionist autocratic states like China. The rules-based international system was constructed mostly by leading democratic allies at the end of World War II and was deepened and expanded by many other countries over time. The system is predicated on a set of norms and principles pertaining to global security, the economy, and governance. It consists of a set of rules encouraging peaceful, predictable, and cooperative behavior among states that is consistent with liberal values and principles. Formal institutional bodies, such as the United Nations and NATO, that serve to legitimize and uphold these rules and provide a forum to discuss and settle disputes. And the role of powerful democratic states to help preserve and defend the system. In the security realm, the system is characterized by formal alliances in Europe and Asia, in addition to rules that protect state sovereignty and territorial integrity and place limits on the use of military force and the spread of weapons of mass destruction. In the economic domain, the rules-based system has served to promote an interconnected global economy based on free markets and open trade and finance. Finally, in the realm of governance, the rules-based system advanced democratic values and human rights. The system has never been fixed, but has evolved over time with major periods of adaptation and expansion at major inflection points after World War II and at the end of the Cold War. In recent years, however, this system has come under new pressure. Revisionist autocratic powers seek to disrupt or displace the system, while regional powers pursue nuclear and missile programs and terrorism. Populist movements challenge global economic integration. There are increasing questions about the United States' willingness and ability to continue to lead the system. The COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated these negative trends and unleashed additional shocks to the system. But the greatest threat to the system may come from the rise of China. Well, there you go. This system was created by the West. It's not fixed, which is sort of the problem here, that the rules change and expand and evolve, and that it's existed because it hasn't had a challenge from anybody else, because the United States was the great power and we could sort of dictate the rules and tell people, hey, you follow the rules or you're going to have problems. So if that is what the United States wants, what do the other states like Russia and China want that's different than the rules-based order? What kind of order do they want? And on the website Diplomatic Opinion, he describes it here. And he says, the problem is the U.S. and its Western allies on one hand, and Russia and China on the other hand, have different perceptions of the international order. While Russia and China put the emphasis on international law and the UN Charter, the U.S. and its Western allies favor an expanded set of rules. Meaning that, again, China and Russia, international law, the United States, this expanded set of rules that aren't quite clear. However, we can go ahead and guess that the rules are whatever the West dictates them to be at the time, which is kind of the problem. From 2021, there was a virtual UN Security Council open debate on multilateralism. And a foreign minister from China, Wang Yi, he called the UN the banner of multilateralism, as opposed to what we have. And he said, to pursue multilateralism, we must follow the basic norms governing international relations built around the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, uphold the authority and stature of the UN, and ensure its central role in international affairs. He called for engagement in win-win cooperation, not zero-sum games. And that's something I've brought up before. It seems that if another country rises a little bit, like Russia or China, we can't, in the West, accept that. We have to beat that country down. Where he wants, again, win-win cooperation. Let's all make some money and move on. It goes on here. He said what is needed is dialogue and cooperation on the basis of equality and mutual respect among all countries, not bullying or hegemony. He put the emphasis on a law-based international order and did not even use the phrase rules-based international order. He said international rules must be based on international law and must be written by all. They are not a patent or a privilege of a few. They must be applicable to all countries, and there should be no room for exceptionalism or double standards. Although he did not name any country specifically, it was obvious who he had in mind in the context of exceptionalism. And this is sort of the fundamental problem here. We have a system that is not in stone and has not been agreed upon by all parties, yet it's being, or trying to be, enforced on the entire world. And I think that is the underlying reason we're having all this conflict right now with Ukraine and Russia, with China and Taiwan. The West has the rules-based international order and is saying the entire world must accept it, or we're going to try to enforce it, either through sanctions or, if necessary, war. And if we're going to, again, have any peace on this planet, there has to be some sort of agreement that everybody's involved in. It just can't be one person. And so what are other problems with the rules-based international order as supported by the West? Well, in a paper called China Wants a Rules-Based International Order Too, Professor Stephen M. Walt says this: but the distinction between the United States' supposed commitment to a system of rules and China's alleged lack thereof is misleading in at least three ways. First, it overlooks the United States' own willingness to ignore, evade, or rewrite the rules whenever they seem inconvenient. If we are honest with ourselves, we have to acknowledge that Washington sometimes thinks it's perfectly okay for might to make right and for winners to take all. The collapse of the Soviet Union when the United States took full advantage of a weakened post-Soviet Russia is a perfect example. Now, I brought this up in other videos. When the Soviet Union collapsed and Russia was in disarray, we didn't reach across to help Russia grow. We looked at it as an opportunity to keep Russia down and to go after its resources. All these oligarchs that went in and they were stripping the country until Putin showed up in 99 and put a stop to this. And all the oligarchs, they fled with their tens of billions of dollars to London and then spent the next 20 years complaining about being kicked out unfairly because apparently they support democracy and Putin doesn't, despite the fact that it was when Russia was in complete disarray that they took advantage of that situation to enrich themselves to the tune of tens of billions of dollars. And my question is, what fair and democratic process was that allowed that to happen, to allow them to become so rich while the rest of the country was struggling? We support democracy in the case of these oligarchs when it supports what they got and what they wanted and their power. Funny how that works, right? Now, another professor, Stephen Tallman, he's a professor in Germany. He also described the problem with the rules-based order and why perhaps an international law-based order would make more sense. And he says, judging by the situations in which the term rule-based order has been used, it seems to be a broader term than international law, i.e., legally binding rules that are based on and require the consent of each individual state. It seems to encompass both traditional international law rules and what is usually referred to as soft law, legally non-binding political commitments. It also appears to include rules made both by states and non-state actors. The term has been used to call upon certain states to comply with existing international legal rules, which these states actually have not consented to, and thus are not bound. The term rule-based order blurs the distinction between binding and non-binding rules, giving the impression that all states and international actors are subject to this order, irrespective of whether or not they have consented to these rules. While international law is general and universal, the rules-based order seems to allow for special rules in special cases. This is a dangerous development because if an international order that bases itself on rules does not require consent to these rules, the question arises of who ultimately lays down these rules and determines their content. In practice, the rules-based order seems to be an attempt to establish law, making by majority at the international level. However, the will of a few Western states, or even the majority of states, cannot be equated to international or regional rules or be the basis for a rules-based order. While international law is based on the principle of sovereign equality of states, a rules-based order detached from the requirement of consent may become an order of the strong or an order by dictate of the majority. And that makes a lot of sense. If other countries did not consent to it, how is this a fair system that makes sense? And he's talking about the order of the strong. Post-World War II, we have the Soviet Union in opposition to the United States. But there was no other real challenge to the United States in the West, which allowed might to be right in this example. Who was going to challenge us? No one, so we dictated the rules. So while we claim to want a system of fairdom, right? We want things to be fair, equal for everyone. In reality, we took advantage of our position as the exceptional country in the world to create a dictate for the rest of the world. The problem now is we have China economically almost at parity with the United States. We have Russia, who has finally risen out of the ashes of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And we are getting other powers who are now challenging these rules and going, they're not fair. We want a rules-based order based off of international law. And until we have this, there's going to be this conflict. Now, one of the arguments for the rules-based order is that it has flourished and brought prosperity to the planet since World War II, and that it has prevented any great power conflict. And is that true? Well, yes, we've had a economic boom post World War II. I think that has to do in part because of the change in technology that's provided the ability to have a higher standard of living. But as far as this idea that there hasn't been a conflict between great powers, I think that has to do with the nuclear deterrent. We spend 40 years right with the Soviet Union on the brink of nuclear war, with the crescendo being in '63 with the Cuban Missile Crisis. So there was always that fear of nuclear war and a great power clash, but thankfully they understood, the leaders at the time, JFK, for example, that a conflict between the Soviet Union and the United States would mean global annihilation. So was it the rules-based order that prevented conflict, or was it basically the idea that if we do have conflict, we're going to destroy everything so we can't do it? And I think that makes more sense, because today we have conflict just through proxies. Ukraine is a proxy. And we've had other proxy wars. Korea, the Chinese supported North Korea, and the United States supported South Korea, and that was a proxy. The Vietnam War, a proxy war. So we've had skirmishes between the powers, just not direct conflict due to a nuclear constraint. Now, why does the United States oppose an international law-based order? And the reason given, and this is taken from The Atlantic, they say here, in the U.S. and much of the liberal West, the concept of the rule of law is vital to a properly functioning society. The idea, at least in theory, that the law is impartial, independent, and applied evenly and consistently to all, and that it serves to protect the innocent, including from the state. China's leaders, however, follow the concept of rule by law, in which the legal system is a tool used to assure Communist Party dominance. Courts are forms for opposing the government's will. The state can do just about anything it wants and then find some helpful language in the law to justify it. Now, further on in the article, he says that the Chinese government would use international law in order to enforce its mandates and its vision of the world. Now, is this true? We don't really know, because I think in the context he talks about here, internally within China, certainly that could be the case. But if we had international law and all parties coming together to agree on these laws and to mediate them, I don't think that would necessarily be the case. But that seems to be the reason why the West doesn't want the international law-based order. I would say it's because the West favors the rule-based order because, well, we create the rules. So why would you want to go to a different system where you have to actually share power and actually negotiate and come to an agreement with all parties? We in the West don't want that. We want to tell the rest of the world, here's how things are going to be. If you don't go along with it, we got some sanctions for you. We got some proxy wars. We got the CIA doing things behind the scenes, the NGO, some State Department. We're going to come and destabilize your country and turn it on its head. That has been what the United States has done for the past 60 years. And now it's starting to get to the point where it's not working as well as it used to, because other countries are becoming aware of it, and they no longer want to function as proxies and be ripped apart through manipulation by the United States and Western countries. So today, this meeting between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, very important, and another step towards a new world order. And I hate to use that phrase because it comes with all that conspiracy stuff, but we are moving toward a new order. And the question I always ask is, will this be a peaceful transition to a multilateral world, or will the West fight it the entire way? And is that going to cause some sort of great power conflict that, of course, could end up being nuclear, meaning we destroy the entire world. Well, hopefully, obviously, hopefully that does not happen. Well, that's it for now. Again, if you are new to my channel, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.